Welcome to Field 302, Study Session 4, Structuring of a Philosophical Write-up. Introduction. The task of writing an essay in philosophy begins with research. Hence, before thinking of how to structure a philosophical essay, one must have done serious research and thoroughly studied related materials on the topic of interest, understood them, and drafted some rough notes that will be useful once the main write-up begins. While reading through materials and carrying out research, it is important for the researcher to clearly identify what his or her intentions are with the topic of interest. Does it sound logical, meaningful, and worth defending, or are the main arguments inconsistent, which need to be pointed out, revised, or abandoned? This is necessary, as it is not enough for a researcher in philosophy to simply describe in a series of statements the philosophical position found in the material he has read without any attempt to present sound and constructive analyses, argumentations, or criticisms for or against the position held. To simply describe the philosophical position one has read will be merely descriptive and expository, which are no gems of philosophical writing. However, a researcher or writer in philosophy must be willing to provide logical reasonings, arguments, and analyses for or against any philosophical position. To do this effectively, there is a structure, pattern, or format an essay in philosophy should take. Although there is no consensus among philosophers on the specifics of such a structure, we can attempt to present a general picture of it in this lecture. What will become obvious are certain ingredients that must be present in an essay for it to be termed philosophical. Objective: to examine the pattern an essay in philosophy should take, to identify essential ingredients that must be present in any philosophical write-up. Context: an essay is generally taken to be divided into three parts: the introduction or beginning, the body or middle, and the conclusion or end. What follows is a description of these. Introduction: stating the problem and thesis clearly. The introductory section to an essay in philosophy states thesis in the form of a concise statement of the critical stand or position you take on the topic of interest. This should be in the first paragraph. The first few sentences can briefly define the topic of the essay. The rest of the paragraph should state the thesis. The thesis will be a proposition that the writer attempts to defend with reasoned arguments. But the thesis inevitably implies that there is a problem that prompted the essay, a problem that will then be stated. It could be that a particular approach or perception have been ignored in previous attempt to analyze the topic of interest, or a particular conventional approach to or perceptive on the topic of interest has some flaws that has not been taken cognizance of and which the thesis is meant to remedy. Or arguments against a particular perception on the topic of interest does not hold in the face of new analysis and evidence as presented in the thesis. Thus, philosophy is rightly regarded as a problem-solving enterprise. Part of what one learns in becoming a philosopher is to find problems and then to use all the skills at one's disposal to solve them. A philosophy paper without a problem is very much like a body without a head. Interestingly, problems are pretty easy to come by in philosophy. Whenever philosophers hold opposing positions, we are likely to have the problems of determining who has the strongest position. What if we find that all the positions have serious weaknesses? That represents a problem on a new level. Now we have to try to determine if there are insoluble difficulties as opposed to solvable difficulties. We need to start modifying positions to make them stronger. One important benefit of acquiring a problem for a philosophical essay is that it will largely determine the thesis and dictate what the parts of the paper are going to be. If one is trying to decide which of two commentators has the right interpretation of an argument, then he or she is going to have to explain each of their views, in what ways they disagree, what the crucial points are for resolving the disagreement, and the philosophical moral to be drawn from the resolution. This is where philosophical and reasoning skills, as well as creativity, come into play. Thus, the introductory section to a philosophical essay must contain a clearly identified problem and clearly stated theses that are connected in context. This also implies that the scope of study in the essay must be made explicitly clear to avoid ambiguity and vagueness. A well-written introduction will inject the needed anticipation into the reader to continue reading to get the main gist of the writer's argument. Body, analysis, argument, and discussion. The body of an essay in philosophy could contain a number of segments and subheadings intended to develop more fully the reasoned argument a researcher offers in support of his or her thesis. It contains the details and examples or evidences that build towards the essay's conclusion and justify the thesis. The development of the argument is best done when the writer writes in such a way as if he was trying to convince a skeptical reader. It is also important to know that one does not argue in a vacuum. Developing one's argument means that one is able to show how they respond to other arguments that oppose them and how they fit within a particular aspect of the history of philosophy. A researcher must attempt to show that the argument he or she develops in support of his or her thesis is better than the counter arguments that object to it. Thus, in the body of the essay, three things must stand out: the arguments for the thesis, reasons to show that the argument is valid, and evidences that the premises are true. Concerning the first point, it is good practice to get out all of one's premises as soon as possible. This gives the reader the opportunity to see the general structure of the argument. The reader has a chance to see the overall picture of how the writer is going to get to the thesis. The next step is to show that the argument is valid, that is, that the premises set out will in fact lead to the conclusion. Since a valid argument guarantees a true conclusion only if all the premises are true, the next step is to prove that the premises are true. First, state the evidences for the premises. This is the most direct and straightforward way of pressing one's case. Anticipating and clarifying potential objections. Possible objections to the point of view which have been argued for should be considered. The writer should show why these objections are not fatal to his or her position. If a writer thinks of an objection to his or her own position but then fails to include it, it might be the case that the reader will immediately recognize the objection and think that the paper has not adequately addressed competing views. It is better to deal with the objection in just a few lines than not dealing with it at all. One thing that is dreaded in philosophy is the objection that refutes our position. However, in philosophical essays, this is not nearly as fatal as it may seem at first. If one finds a knockdown objection to one's argument, then one can do one or two things: conclude that the original argument did not hold up to the criticisms and state these very clearly in the conclusion, or swap arguments and take the knockdown objection as a better argument. Either one of these approaches is much better than trying to disguise or ignore an argument. If an objection is actually fatal to one's position to the extent that one cannot offer a counter objection, it is better to rework the essay and start arguing for the other position and use the initial position as your objection. The initial position will now probably make an excellent objection, but definitely not a fatal one. This will only make the paper stronger. This is one of the advantages of self-critiquing one's argument. Conclusion. This part of the essay mainly summarizes the thesis and analysis developed in the introduction and body of the essay. It also makes a final effort to convince the reader that the thesis has been established as a reliable conclusion with effective supporting arguments. However, the writer must be careful to ensure that the substance of the conclusion does not go beyond what has been argued for. Another way to end an essay is to explain what further implication it has or what the next step of research might be. This last conclusion is ill-advised if one is submitting a final essay for a course. Still, another way to end an essay is to explain why the results or position taken are important, if their importance could not be appreciated by stating them earlier in the essay. Typically, one should explain why the results are important near the beginning of the essay in order to spice up the reader's interest. Sometimes, however, the importance cannot be appreciated before one goes through the argument, or the relation between the results and the importance is implausible without the argument. In these cases, it is both justified and advisable to explain the importance of the results at the end, using examples. Simply put, examples drive the point home. They make arguments more explicit to the reader. Hence, a good writer should endeavor to make use of examples. An example as a specific instance of a general principle of abstract concept is often drawn from the researcher's own experience. An example provides an accessible, understandable instance of a general idea that may be hard to understand in the abstract. It can be used to clarify a principle, to answer a question, to give substance to an abstract concept. In addition, examples can demonstrate understanding such that the example one gives shows the extent to which he or she understands the concept. Thus, examples are a way that researchers can link abstract notions of philosophy to their own experiences, and this helps to show that philosophical concepts are not merely abstract but have bearing in human experiences. In using examples, however, one should ensure that the examples are on point, instructive, and that they demonstrate understanding of the concept being exemplified. Conceptual clarification. For an essay to achieve its primary goals of the expression of truth in a clear and vivid manner, the researcher must attempt to state clearly the sense and meaning of the basic concept he or she is employing in the essay and how they relate to one another. This can either be done within the introduction or under a separate section at the beginning of the body of the essay. However, it is often easy to define or analyze a concept in an essay and show its relationship to other concepts in the essay. This type of clarification of concept is what is often referred to as analytical definitions. Analytical definitions are usually offered with a specific purpose in mind. They attempt to reform ordinary usage of a term. Such reforms can be precise or expansive. An example of a precising definition is Kant's definition of experience as a combination of sense, perceptions, and certain operations of the mind. In this sense, its use of the term is more specific than the usual usage of sense perception. An example of an expansive definition is when right is used to cover animal rights. This is expansive because on traditional theories, only humans were taught to have rights. An analytical definition can tell us what features are common to all things of a particular class, and it can tell us what features are unique to that class of things. Sometimes an analytical definition can do both at the same time. In this way, a definition provides a precise description. Once an essay has a precise definition of a term as a working definition, or the sense in which that term will be used throughout the essay, the writer has succeeded in removing much of the vagueness and ambiguity that could have haunted the essay. The role of Occam's razor. Occam's razor, attributed to the 14th century logician Williams of Ockham, is a principle of research and writing that simply states that entities should not be multiplied unnecessarily. It is simply referred to as a principle of parsimony or succinctness. It upholds the view that Among competing hypotheses, theories, or viewpoints, the one with the fewer and simpler assumptions should be taken. It aims to shift the burden of proof in an argument and attain simplicity. In writing and research, the principle encourages simple and clear presentation of argument rather than a rhetoric or complex form of writing. This is very important for students of philosophy who think that they can impress their teachers by the use of complex words and concepts. For a tutor who has hundreds of essays to read through, the best way to impress him or her is by writing in a simple and straightforward manner and by clearly stating the senses in which concepts have been used. Unfortunately, in most professional philosophical essays, complexity and rhetoric seems to reign. Philosophers often write their books and articles as if in a competition for the most sophisticated writer. But such form of writing often defeats the primary aim of understanding and clarity, which is what the Occam's razor advocates for. Summary. The value of an essay in philosophy is to be found in the manner in which the arguments are laid out. The way an essay is structured goes a long way to determine if the arguments being pushed forward will be acceptable or rejected. It also tells us a lot about the writer's competence in philosophical writing and research. Although the structuring of an essay in philosophy may vary from one scholar to another, the above analysis clearly indicates certain features that must be present in any such structuring or layout. An introduction that clearly presents the problem and thesis of the essay and summarizes the main arguments that the essay seeks to present. A body that develops the thesis in a coherent manner, taking note of possible objections to the arguments and responding to them. And a conclusion that summarizes the essay and points towards the implication of the thesis and or areas of further research. It is also important for an essay in philosophy to make use of practical examples that the reader can relate with and also endeavor to fulfill the Occam's razor principle. This is the end of study session 4. Thanks for listening.